Welcome back everyone to more Tony Stewart's All-American Racing. And in today's video, we're going to talk setup changes that I've been making for the newly released late model DLC. In a lot of ways, I feel like they drive very similar to the big block modifieds, but there are also some subtle differences, and those differences have required some changes to the setups. So now let's head to Baxterville. Our focus in today's video is to talk about the changes that I've made from the big block setup to better fit the differences I felt in driving the late model. So if you're looking for a step-by-step guide of what each area of the car does and how it affects the driving of the car, I'll put a link down below in the description to the big block modified setup here at Baxterville, because today's video we're simply going to focus on the differences. I'm not going to go into each and every adjustment on the car. So let's first start out by talking about a huge difference between the two cars, and that is tire stagger. Now, the first thing I did is I wanted to know, how does the big block modified setup translate over to the late model? Do they drive in a very similar fashion? And can I use that big block modified setup as a baseline for the late model setup? And after running a lot of laps, the answer was a resounding yes. They drive in a very similar fashion. So what are the differences? What are the differences in the setup options? What are the differences in how they drive? Well, let's first start by talking about the differences in how they drive for me. Everybody drives the car a little bit different, but for me, the late model over-rotates using the identical setup with the big block. It over-rotates, which means that, at first, over-rotation sounds good because you're on the dirt. It means you can carry more speed through the corner. The car is looser. You're not bogging down the engine and so forth. However, if the car is over-rotating, it can lead to scrubbing off too much speed in the corner and actually slowing you down overall. And that's exactly what I was finding. The car was just too loose overall. It wasn't necessarily on the entry through the center or on the exit. It was just over-rotating overall, which was actually a good thing because that's something I can adjust for. So when I come into the setup options, I wanted to next see what are the differences that are available in the setup. The big change is in the tire stagger. You have a couple of more inches of tire stagger available to you in the late model as opposed to the big block modified. So what does the tire stagger do? More tire stagger is going to increase the rotation of the car and theoretically should allow us to carry more speed through the corners, which ultimately mean better lap times. But as I said, I was already feeling that the car was over-rotating using the identical tire stagger to the big block. So increasing the tire stagger meant I was going to increase the over-rotation even more. However, I decided to base the setup on maximum tire stagger simply so that we could get the maximum available speed, assuming we can make some additional changes to control that rotation of the car. But by no means am I saying that you have to use the maximum tire stagger if you want the fastest lap times. That is not the case. I simply needed to make a decision on what I was going to build the setup around or adjust the setup around. So I decided to go with the maximum tire stagger and show you guys that you do have more adjustment available here than what we had in the big block. So how do I control that rotation? How do I minimize the over-rotation of the car? After trying a lot of different things that we're going to talk about, the front weight was my best option. It wasn't the first thing I tried. The first thing I tried was increasing the left rear spring rate. By reducing the split between the left rear spring and the right rear spring, you will tighten the car up, particularly on corner exit. And that worked very well for me, and that could have very well been the direction I ended up going. However, what I found is that the speed just wasn't quite there the same way as it was when I adjusted the front weight. So at 49%, this is a few percent higher than what I had in the big blocks, and I needed it. Adding front weight stabilizes the car, it slows down, it takes rotation away from the car, and normally we would look at that as a bad thing because adding a lot of stability to the car can actually make the car very fun to drive. It can make it very stable to drive, but it can also take speed out of the car and slow you down, which is certainly not something that we want. In this case, adding front weight to the car sped up the car. Every time I added a 0.5% or a full percent to the front weight, I got faster because my control over the car became better. As always, your mileage will vary based on how you drive the car. You may need more front weight, you may need less front weight based on how you approach driving the car. But for me, 49.0 worked very well. I can also go very well with more front weight or a little bit less, but 49.0 seemed to be a very good sweet spot for me, especially when combined with the maximum corner weight or wedge at 55.0. This is another very good way for me to control the rotation of the car. Next, moving on down to the rear of the car. I started out using a 1/2 inch on the anti-roll bar, but what I found over and over is just the rear of the car was just too loose, even after adding the front weight. So the only way that I could get more right rear grip and really tighten the car up on corner exits so that I had the ability to control it the way I wanted to was to remove the anti-roll bar. Again, if you want the car to rotate more, particularly from the center of the corner and off, then that anti-roll bar can definitely help you out with that. But for me, I already had plenty of rotation. I didn't need any help there. What I needed was side bite coming off the corner. I needed more grip in that right rear corner, and removing the anti-roll bar did just that. Another area that I spent a lot of time adjusting on was the track bar. In general, left side track bar I use for the entry of the corner. The higher the number on the left side, the looser the car will be on corner entry. The right side of the car, the higher number means looser on corner exit, since we use the right side of the car or the track bar for corner exit. So in this case, I wanted to add a little bit of extra help, a little bit of extra rotation on corner entry, but I didn't need that on corner exit. So that's why you see a higher number on the left side as opposed to the right side. So what does that mean for you? If you find that the car is just too tight on corner exit, then you've got a couple of options right here in this area. You can increase the right side track bar, or you can come in and hook back up that anti-roll bar. And the more you increase that, the looser the car will be, the more it will want to rotate overall. Another area that I made an adjustment in is actually went the opposite way that I expected to go. The steering offset is determined very much on a personal preference basis. For me, I generally go higher on this number based on the camber and the tire stagger, particularly the tire stagger in these cars. So a higher number on the steering offset means that you shouldn't have to turn as much to the right on the straightaway. However, if you get this number too high, you'll actually find that the car wants to veer to the right or turn itself to the right on the straightaway. And while that's not as big a deal for me when I'm by myself on the track, such as during qualifying or during a heat race when there's fewer cars, when I'm in heavy traffic during a feature race, that's the last thing I want. I want the car to be very stable and very precise with the steering. So I had estimated that I was going to need to increase the steering offset from about 1.5 that I was using in the big blocks, but I actually ended up lowering this number to give me a little bit better control. Again, at 1.5 or 1.6, I found that the car was pulling a little bit to the right on the straightaway, again, which is fine when I was alone on the track or in open track, such as during a heat race when there's very little traffic. But when I got into heavy traffic during the feature race, I needed to lower this number so I could have finer control over the steering. But again, these numbers will be all over the place just based on your personal preference. I tested as low as about 0.7 and as high as about 1.5, 1.6 or so. And the lower numbers are something I preferred, and ultimately somewhere in the middle is where I landed. Now, the final thing I want to talk about today is the rear end ratio. There are a lot of different numbers that you can really use here depending on how you drive the car, and also whether you're in open track or if you're in heavy traffic. The reason that becomes in play, and you might want to make some adjustments to this from, say, the heat race to the feature race, is because the rear end ratio controls the amount of RPMs that you're turning. If you turn too many RPMs, you'll start to hit the rev limiter, and that will slow you down on the straightaway. It'll take speed away from the car. So 5.6 was the highest number that I would ever want to use at this particular track and car combination. The reason being, it's pretty hard on the rev limiter when I am alone on the track, but when I'm in heavy traffic, such as during the feature race, it worked out very well. So how do you adjust this area? The higher number on rear end ratio, if I go from 5.6 to 5.7, 5.8, and so on, that is going to increase the RPMs, and that can be helpful if you find yourself in heavy traffic and you're on the bottom. So if you're on the bottom, generally you're going to have fewer RPMs because you have tighter radius into and off the corner. Your engine is going to be more likely to get bogged down. So adding a little bit of rear end ratio, a few clicks there, can help get those RPMs back up. However, if you're spending all of your time in open track, or if you choose to run the high side when you're in traffic, then you're going to need a little bit more room for more RPMs, and you can do that by lowering this number by a few clicks. That's going to give you more straight line speed and allow you to ultimately be a little bit faster and better on the high side. So for me, 5.6 was a good middle ground because I really ultimately wanted the setup to be very good in the feature race, where I spend a lot of time in heavy traffic and also a lot of time on the very bottom. So very tight radius into and off the corner, and 5.6 allows me to get up to the rev limiter but not spend a lot of time on that rev limiter. So again, a lot of adjustability throughout the car, but these are some of the adjustments that I'm showing you guys today that really helped me to take this setup from the big block modified and make it really work very well in the late models. As always, there is a lot of different directions that you can go with the setups, and hopefully today's video has helped you find the direction that you might want to try on your own. So thank you guys very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more Tony Stewart's All-American Racing.